Thanks very much, Yoko. And I think I'm advancing through green, so that's great. Hopefully this will work. I have sometimes some challenges walking and chewing gum at the same time, so hopefully I'll get the slides all right. If I could take the liberty of just reflecting a little bit very quickly on the comments this morning, the comments from yesterday. Honorable Lloyd Axworthy spoke about policy frameworks and paradigms and how those things change and the values that underlie them. We heard a lot yesterday about clarity of mind, purity of heart, open mind, open spirit, and I think that's the thing that has struck me in terms of the kinds of dialogues that have happened over the course of the last couple of days, and the notion of curiosity and how we build together and define and identify what we're hoping to see through our settlement and integration programming and how we go about measuring that. There's been a lot of talk of respectful and appropriate engagement, cross-culturally, the importance of exchanging ideas, the importance of recognizing the concept of equity and that people are at different starting places, which I think is an important concept as we talk about how we are measuring outcomes and the consequences that we can attribute to our programming and our policies. We've talked a lot about civic engagement and the way that engaging and participating actually changes individuals and communities, which I think was quite a profound statement in terms of the Syrian response and how communities talked about becoming more resilient. That was a theme in one of the workshops that I attended yesterday. The concept of knowledge and allowing people to have more than simply information, but knowledge upon which they can exercise agency and control over their own decisions. And the idea of finding commonality. I attended a session where there was talk of the LIP and in Hamilton, the local immigration partnership and some of the engagement around unifying around that concept of love of Hamilton. And I'm a Hamiltonian, so that resonated with me. I see another Hamiltonian in the crowd. But that idea of finding commonality. And I think these things are extremely important as we talk about how we measure outcomes and the work that we are doing in settlement and integration. I'd like to thank those who have shared those concepts over the last day and a half. I'd also like to thank colleagues in the room because really I'm speaking on behalf of various folks. So Liz Kaminsky, Catherine Doiron from my own division who contributed to this presentation, our performance measurement unit, our research and evaluation branch, because I'll be commenting on some of the evaluation findings, and that's the work of others in our department. So outcomes, and how do we look at what we can attribute to the work that we are supporting? How and why should we be looking at outcomes? I think this is, the Honorable Lloyd Axworthy talked about pathways and crossroads, and this is an important time right now for reflection and for renewal. We within, at the federal level, we have a government that is focused very much on results, on client service, on diversity, of course, and linguistic duality, social inclusion. I should probably add to that slide also the concept of reconciliation from some of the discussions that we had yesterday. Our minister has a mandate letter that speaks very significantly about working with provincial and territorial governments toward a renewed focus on the delivery of high-quality settlement services and a strong focus on data and outcomes, and those are our marching orders. We have an evaluation of the settlement program that's looked at the period of 2011-12 to 2015-16, and those findings will be publicly available shortly. So another key piece of information that will be available to us. Our minister and our parliamentary secretary during the spring and summer months did a series of consultations across the country, which I'll be commenting on. So yet more valuable information that they've gleaned and heard from across the country. Several speakers have spoken about the new multi-year levels plan, and so that also provides an important contextual piece. And in terms of how we move forward and look at renewing our approach to settlement, the issue of evidence-based policy and program development is critically important. Looking at how we improve services, looking at user-centric perspectives, and I'll comment very briefly on the notion of a design challenge that we did recently, and what that means in terms of learning about well-being and how we factor that within the context of our understanding of outcomes. So also in terms of context, I would mention at a bureaucratic level that we have just created within the Department of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship a new settlement and integration sector that brings together the high-level policy thinking, policy development. Yesterday we heard some questions with respect to eligibility for services, pathways to permanence. So some of those high-level policy issues are also being looked at within the same sector where we are looking at the program policy issues, how we look at information and orientation, language training, etc., but also our operations group, who is in charge of the grants and contributions funding that gets dispersed across the country to the service providers who are doing that work on the ground. We are now under the authority of one assistant deputy minister, which for us is really important in terms of bringing that broad swath of settlement and integration work across the spectrum under the authority of one assistant deputy minister. We also have within the Government of Canada a new policy on results that focuses on communicating results. And this is a new system that will be fully operational by the 1st of April. But what that means is that settlement is one of 12 key programs within our department. We also have citizenship, passports, refugee programming, but settlement and integration is identified as a program stream where we are responsible for identifying our performance measurement approach and strategy. The other really important contextual piece is more on the human side. Over the summer months, colleagues from our settlement and integration sector had the opportunity to work with academics, to be out in the field actually talking directly with newcomers, including refugees, in order to better understand their challenges, barriers, opportunities, and how we can be doing our programming more effectively. And also speaking with service provider organizations to gather their insights as well, because we believe that it's important to continually be hearing from those on the ground and those who are affected by our policies and programming. So how do we measure success? This is a snapshot of our settlement program logic model that deals at the level of immediate outcomes with respect to knowledge. Within the first year of services, are people gaining, for example, knowledge of life in Canada, connections to help them with labor market attachment? The more intermediate outcomes during that period of 1 to 5 years after a first service, where we're looking at behavior. Are people able to make informed decisions about their lives? Are they able to use an official language in order to function in Canadian society and the labor market? And of course, we have those broader ultimate outcomes, and that is a shared broad societal response in terms of the successful settlement and integration of newcomers. I would add as well that within our logic model, although not depicted on this screen, we've included some elements with respect to program management. So what are we doing as the feds, and how is it that we are engaging with key partners like the provinces and territories, other government departments, non-governmental organizations, because that engagement piece is critically important. We are not doing this work alone. In terms of the data that Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada is collecting, and many of you in the room who are service provider organizations know because you're playing a pivotal role in the collection of that data. So our grants and contributions system, GCS, which you see in the bottom of the screen, looks at things like budgeting information, operational management, applications to our programming come into that system. Service providers who are funded by us are required to submit narrative reporting, annual progress reporting, that highlights in a qualitative way some of the challenges, opportunities that they are encountering in their work. Within our Immigrant Contribution Agreement reporting environment, or ICARE, we have data with respect to the number of clients, their characteristics, number of services being provided, etc. As part of our recent evaluation, there was a newcomer outcome survey that spoke to about 15,000, or it was a web-based questionnaire with about 15,000 inputting information in terms of their trajectory and progress with respect to settlement and integration. And we're also trying to better link with external databases in order to have a broader perspective of newcomers relative to others who may not be availing themselves of our services, and what does that look like. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the information that our systems tell us with respect to service usage. In 2016-17, we had over 410,000 clients who accessed at least one settlement service, which was an increase over the previous year. We expect to see continued increases in service usage, particularly as we have a levels plan that is bringing in more newcomers. Newcomers from all immigration categories use our services. We know that some use more services than others and in some particular categories. For example, in all program components, whether it's needs assessment or information and orientation or support services, we see more female clients than male. We see refugees with the highest participation in things like community connections that's aimed at breaking down barriers and isolation, and support services like child minding that enable people to avail themselves of our services. So that's just a rough snapshot of service usage. I mentioned earlier that we have just completed an evaluation of our programming. This gives a sense of some of the key findings with respect to our programming. We know that in general, we've got the services calibrated in the right areas. We see different client outcomes in varying degrees. For example, combination of language training when combined with employment services is an area where we tend to see stronger outcomes than either of those services delivered individually. We see younger clients moving through their Canadian language benchmarks more quickly than older clients. So there are differences in how people experience their trajectory through services and the kinds of outcomes that are happening. But of course, our programming is but one piece of the pie. I've mentioned already the importance of partnership, the fact that we are working with, of course, provincial territorial governments, our Réseau en Immigration Francophone, and the local immigration partnerships, and that kind of broader intersectoral outreach that they are doing is critically important. Also, initiatives like the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Project, very important in terms of building bridges with employers and others. So that notion of a shared perspective. So what does this mean moving forward in terms of data, for one? We know that there is a wide range of data being collected, and we hear from our service providers that sometimes they experience that as a burden, as a challenge in terms of the many different ways that we're requiring them to report. But nonetheless, this kind of extensive and exhaustive data is important, but not sufficient. So we know that coming out of the evaluation, that we are going to have to drill down more deeply into what those findings tell us. That we're going to have to make continued improvements to our capacity, not only to analyze data, but to ensure that we are sharing that data back. And that's one of the things that we are hearing extensively from service providers. So from the perspective of policy and moving forward, I've commented on the new mandate letter. and what that gives us as an opportunity to really look at data, outcomes, and measurement. We need to be working, of course, with our key partners and stakeholders in terms of defining what outcomes, evidence, data are most important. What are the principles that should be underlying our settlement and integration work? Thank you. And how is it that we can be driving toward better service delivery improvement? So I'll just quickly mention that some of the themes that were identified within our evaluation from our programming in terms of outcomes-driven programming, language and employment combinations, the Atlantic pilot, these were themes that resonated very strongly at the consultations that our minister undertook recently. So it's great to hear that our stakeholders and our evaluation are identifying some very similar themes, including the importance of Francophone immigration. As we move forward, I'll just quickly touch on that second bullet point, and we've talked about the fact that people are at different starting points when they arrive in Canada. So ensuring that we're delivering the right package of settlement services based on client profile and need in order to drive toward the right outcomes is critically important moving forward. And I'll very briefly mention service delivery improvement, and several of you in the room will be aware of the new service delivery improvement funding that was launched the 14th of November, and the expression of interest process that is currently underway right now for funding for service delivery improvement initiatives that will look at things like language acquisition, employment, youth supports. How do we more effectively deliver settlement programming? What learnings and findings can we be continuously incorporating within our work in order to ensure that there is continuous improvement in the work that we are doing in collaboration with all of you? So I've mentioned service delivery improvement expression of interest, which is now open on our website. The evaluation findings will be available early in 2018, and we will dig down more deeply into those findings to see what they mean for us. We are always looking toward our next call for proposals process, and the priority setting and the dialogue that needs to happen with respect to that next call for proposals will begin shortly. And several in this room who are involved in the National Settlement Council will know that we've been talking about the establishment of a sector and departmental working group on outcomes to really sit together and identify what should be the outcomes for our programming moving forward. So that's a high-level, broad brushstroke from a policy perspective on where we're going in some of our thinking around outcomes. Thank you.